We define trauma by the impact that it has inside of us on our physiology.
If you're doing all these things and your body won't cooperate, it's not that you're lazy, it's that you're fully depleted.
As a physician, I'm asking why, and especially once I get sick and have two conditions strongly correlated with adverse childhood experiences, is there anything I can do about it at this point? Or once it becomes my biology, am I kind of screwed?
The part of the brain exacerbating, lighting up the shame is fueling more stress.
We get brain fog and we go into this automatic obedience where we just do whatever we're told to do because we've given in and given up in order to survive.
Hi, and welcome to the Emotional Longevity Podcast. My name is Dr. Elisha Goldstein. What if the reason you're exhausted or feel overwhelmed or stuck right in the beginning of the year here still isn't a lack of willpower? It's not because you should be able to do these things, but instead it's because your nervous system is doing exactly what it learned to do to survive. Today's guest, Dr. Aimie Apigian, is the author of The Biology of Trauma. She's a physician, a trauma researcher, and she explains how unresolved stress and trauma don't just live in our minds, they become our biology. And this is so important. In this conversation, we explore how trauma shows up as anxiety, depression, chronic illness, and what many people call just kind of a high-functioning burnout. Does that sound familiar to you? We break down the difference between stress and trauma, why your body shuts down when it runs out of energy, and how healing can actually begin today. Not by pushing harder, but instead with safety and capacity. So if you've ever wondered, why can't I just push through like I used to? This episode may finally give you the answer. Okay, let's dive in.
Dr. Aimie Apigian, welcome to the Emotional Longevity Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've been a longtime fan, so this is pretty special for me.
Yeah, well, you've done an amazing job with your new book, and so and it's right in the lane of what I love to talk about. Or you're gonna teach us some stuff here today. So, the biology of trauma. I wanted to kind of dive right into it. So you open up with a quote by Gabor Mate, which says, "Trauma is not what happens to you; it's what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you." I want you to kind of just launch from there.
In 2014, I went through the biggest loss and grief that I have ever experienced. And being a surgery resident at that time, I did what I was trained to do, jumped back into work, and my body was just unable to process what had just happened. And 1 month later, Elisha, I am not able to get out of bed. I'm on 2 mood medications for anxiety and depression. I get diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome of unknown etiology. And then we discover autoimmunity. Mm-hmm. So that is why that quote means so much to me. And I started my book with that because while many people want to look at what happens outside of us or to us, that's not how we define trauma. We define trauma by the impact that it has inside of us on our physiology. I walk through those 5 steps in our physiology in chapter 1 so that people can understand why it is that our body even holds on and makes us sick by becoming our biology.
So say more about that. Our body holds on and makes us sick. So what's the translation? Where's the cause and effect of that?
This was a question that I asked myself so many times once I knew about the adverse childhood experiences. Your audience, I'm sure that they're familiar with them, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but back in the 1980s, Dr. Vincent Felitti was charged with this task of preventing chronic health outcomes in the United States. And the U.S. government at that time looked across all our data and statistics and said the number 1 killers are heart disease and diabetes, and we've discovered this secret. And the secret is it's all because of obesity. Dr. Vincent Felitti, your job is to take these obese people and make them healthy. So that's what he did. So he brings in all these women who have, we're talking over 100 pounds to lose. And he puts them on a very effective protocol. Elisha, this was the most effective protocol that we had ever had for obesity. He was so incredibly happy with the results. that imagine his frustration when his best patients, the ones who were losing the most amount of weight, completely drop out of the program, quit, never want to see him again, and regain all of their weight and more.
Mm-hmm.
Able to put aside his ego, he calls him back in and be like, tell me, what is going on? Why would you leave the program if you were so successful? And they said, Dr. Folletti, what you think is the problem has actually been the solution to my problem. And now we know that all of these things that these women started to tell him about that had happened in their lifetime, that they cause adult onset disease, things that happen in our childhood, for example. And yet the studies now show it's bringing on autoimmunity in adulthood. It's bringing on cardiovascular disease. It's bringing on all of the chronic health issues have now been associated to the adverse childhood experiences. So as a physician, I'm asking why, and especially once I get sick and I have two conditions that are strongly correlated with adverse childhood experiences, I'm asking the question, is there anything I can do about it at this point? Or once it becomes my biology, am I kind of screwed? And this is just the best that I can expect out of life, and I'm just going to manage my symptoms for the rest of my life. I actually didn't know the answer to this. And so I made a decision to fight for my life, get my health back, get my career back, because I had to go on a medical leave. So this was the foundation for me even studying trauma and the body. Once it becomes your biology, how does it become my biology so that I can then use those same leverage points to reverse and undo, or my word, repair those effects so that a person can still have their best life, be in their best health, and live from their best self.
I love that. I like that you use the word repair and heal too. I would kind of add to that, because you're right. There's like this injury that's there, and you're not looking to just change it all. You're, transform in some way, which are kind of like just kind of buzzwords, but you're looking to heal and repair. Now you did say you made an assumption, which I want to kind of like peel back from for a second, which is that my audience knows what it means to that the adverse childhood experiences have this biological impact. I want you to unpack that a little bit, because I'm not sure that is totally clear. And so if you can unpack that a little bit, that'd be helpful.
Absolutely. And because of Dr. Folletti and the adverse childhood experiences, that was one reason why I left surgery. Once I knew that my purpose in life was to study trauma in the body, and I went and studied preventive medicine to get that piece, and then went on to addictions and then worked as an addiction physician. And so this idea that what they discovered, and this was published in the 1990s, which makes me a little mad still that this is not more mainstream and has been, that everyone knows about this, because this was published in the 1990s. And it was this unveiling. It was a shock to the world at that time, especially the medical community and the other physicians, that so many people have had adversity in their childhood. Mm-hmm. We've had this assumption, and certainly at that time we had this assumption, that if you were a nice person in a suburban area, you really had not had a lot of hardship in your life. Your childhood must have been privileged. And so to really pull back that curtain and see that, my goodness, 60% of women have had unwanted sexual encounters, sexual trauma, even in these nice suburban areas. It was a shock, which is partly why I still think that they haven't known what to do with it, because those are hard statistics to look at. Once you really understand the degree of trauma that happens to everyday, ordinary, average people, you're called to do something about it. And that was just the opening, because what he did was correlated that with their obesity and showed that this was a very strong correlation with their obesity. But a lot of other researchers jumped on this bandwagon, and now showed that it's not just obesity. It is also all these other chronic health conditions. We're talking digestive issues, your IBS, your stomach ulcers, all of the skin rashes, psoriasis, and all of this stuff. Every chronic health issue has now been correlated with a degree of adversity in your childhood, which is why when I was diagnosed with these two, well, I guess if you want to consider my anxiety and depression as well. So two mental health, two physical health conditions that have all been clearly correlated. We're not saying causation, we're saying correlation. At least that's what the research says. In my book, I clarify the causation and how this happens. So the research will say correlation. And that's how I knew that I had stored trauma in my body, that I needed to go do my own trauma work. I never, ever would have been one that said, yeah, I've had trauma. My childhood was awful. No. And in fact, for me, a lot of my story started with becoming a foster parent and comparing my childhood to the childhood that my foster children have had. Who am I to say, yeah, I've had trauma? But clearly my body was holding on to something because it created these physical manifestations of it that we call disease.
It's interesting that you say that, because the who am I to say that I had trauma. I've there's lots of what? No, there's just
patterns.
There's a good amount of research that shows that perception influences our physiology and our biology.
Yeah.
And so like Alan Langer, Aaliyah Crum, these different people have done these kind of different studies around this. And so I think that when people do that, because I've done that. I certainly have had clients do that, saying like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I seem to have a pretty good life compared to like all these other people. And when we minimize it, we don't get to really work with it. And on the other hand, sometimes comparing ourselves to people who are less fortunate could kind of create a relief. It depends on the degree of it all. But I want you to touch on the difference between stress and trauma and the way that you, because this kind of like stored stress versus trauma, you delineate that a little bit. Like say a bit more about that. Like what's the difference between someone who just feels exhausted and stuck and someone who's experiencing, this kind of stored trauma?
It's funny because what I teach is very different than what I was taught in medical school. And so I'm still very much challenging these concepts that we were taught. And I'm taking what the model has been for chronic stress. And it was developed by a very famous stress researcher, physician, Dr. Hans Selye. So he has his model of stress and what stress is and does to the body. And then he showed on this graph that something happens and it turns into what he called chronic stress. And there's all these other terms that we use in medicine that it's like allostatic load. And now we're talking about just the accumulative burden that the body is holding when it comes to stress. And so as I'm looking at this graph, and now that I, at this point in my life, had started my somatic experiencing training, and I'm working with the art narrative training and that actual process of what happens in our physiology, I'm realizing I know what he's talking about. I know what happens right there. I know what tips the body over from stress into what he called chronic stress. But I think that is a misnomer that has not helped us, and we need to call it what it is, which is trauma physiology. And so the difference is that when the body, we're just going to talk about the body now, when the body has, speaking of meaning and perception, has the perception that we are capable of escaping or overcoming the danger in our life, we will be in stress physiology and giving it our best to overcome. Stress physiology is driven by adrenaline, and that adrenaline is coming from the sympathetic nerve chain that runs down our spine. This is very different than if we are in parasympathetic ventral vagal. We've heard so much about the vagus nerve lately that it's a very different nervous system state because it's being mediated by a completely different branch of our nervous system called the sympathetic branch. This sympathetic is all about high energy driven by adrenaline. Adrenaline, its sole purpose is to make us move and take action. And so when we think of our physiology of, well, what would I need in order to take action and run away from this thing that's chasing me? Well, I'm going to need my blood flow to my muscles and my brain. Well, that's exactly what happens. I'm also going to need sugar, though, because my muscles are going to be contracting so fast. I need sugar, or else I'm going to not be able to run. And that's exactly what adrenaline does. Adrenaline releases all of this sugar into our bloodstream so that it's taken up by our cells. And so it's both an energy production, but also an energy utilization. I say all of this because you asked, what's the difference between stress and this trauma response? That's exactly the difference. And the change in our physiology is that the vagus nerve comes back online, but now as an emergency brake. It's not the foot pedal brake that comes on gently. It's the emergency brake being pulled on by the body that says, we are running at such high cost, it's dangerous to continue at this level. And the change happens when we realize, our nervous system. Our nervous system has the perception that I've done my best and there's nothing else I can do. And so we find ourselves in that experience that Bessel van der Kolk explains so well, which is unbelievable. I can't believe this is happening. It's unbearable. It's creating these unbearable sensations in my body. And it's overwhelming because I am now powerless and alone. Add in there sort of this feeling of being trapped. That's what then creates this shift in our physiology that no longer is mediated by our adrenaline and sympathetic nervous system. It has now switched back to our vagus nerve, which creates this wave-like feeling that a person can notice if they're very self-aware, that all of a sudden it takes away all of their energy. They become drained of energy immediately. They feel that twisting in their gut that makes them want to curl up into a fetal position and pull the covers over their head and just make it all go away. And that's exactly how we survive those instances. Brain inflammation happens, which means we get brain fog and we go into this automatic obedience where we just do whatever we're told to do because we've sort of just given in and given up in order to survive. But that's a very different physiology. It's a low energy physiology. It actually does dim down our metabolism. It's a low energy state as opposed to the stress physiology, which is the highest energy state that we have. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. So if someone is, you could see the overlap in the way that you describe the physiology, you can see the overlap on trauma and depression.
Absolutely.
And why one kind of creates the other, or that trauma kind of is so aligned with kind of creating the depression that's there. Because it's basically the body saying like, I'm done, I'm depleted. And you know, if you feel like you're doing all these things and your body won't cooperate, it's not that you're just lazy. It's that you're fully depleted. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes. So in chapter 9, I walk through how to recognize when these trauma responses have become chronic in our life. And that's exactly it. We have a sense of depletion that we try to override, but there's always that background sense of depletion. Disconnection is another one of the patterns to recognize. We know this from, we have the terminology chronic functional freeze. So this idea of this chronic sense of disconnection from ourselves, from life, from others, but we find coping mechanisms that help us numb, avoid, and distract. I mean, these are things that you talk about all the time, and they are part of how a trauma response becomes chronic, not just an acute, but chronic background state of someone's life, which then is what is creating the biology damage. And we get a diagnosis 10, 20, 30 years later and wonder, where did that come from? It was there all along. It just has been building underneath the surface.
It's interesting. I'll kind of go back to my, graduate school studies in like 2000 and like around there. And there wasn't even a class on trauma.
No.
Like, oh yeah, There wasn't even a class, right? There wasn't even, I had like I was in a progressive school. And so there was like, we had like Pat Ogden come in, for like a talk or something like that, but there was no class. Pat Ogden, by
Right.
the way, for everyone who's listening, is the creator of sensory motor psychotherapy, which there's like two main branches of somatic work, which is somatic experiencing, sensory motor psychotherapy. Aimie talked about somatic experiencing. And so when I'm hearing this, I'm like, and when you were said 1990 hasn't caught up till now, I'm like, I know. Yeah, this is but the hopeful thing is, especially like you're coming out, you've come out with your book, and it's widening awareness on the connection between trauma and our biology. And I think the value of that is someone saying like, oh, it's not my fault. There's not something wrong with me. I can release the shame from this. And now I can work with what Amy's kind of teaching me to do.
Yeah, I love that. And right, like this is what you've talked about for so long, just how we get trapped in the shame and then it becomes this vicious cycle. Shame will keep us stuck in our trauma response, and the trauma response will create more shame. And we just cycle round and round.
And the part of the brain that is exacerbating, is it lighting up the shame, is the same part
Right.
that's kind of fueling more stress. And so the
Exactly.
stress is just accumulating.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I see and experience myself is that when we experience these trauma responses, and normally I don't see people knowing how to complete them. And so that's why the body holds on to that. And that's
Yes.
what I go into in section 2, right? Is like, why does the body hold on? If we experienced this trauma in the past, why is it still holding on? So there's that idea of completion not happening. But what I want to help people know is that then this is the pattern that emerges, is like the loop starts to happen between these two survival states. One survival state being stress, and we experience anxiety with that high energy stress. And then it will loop and it'll fall into the overwhelm or the trauma physiology. And now we're in that depression, we're in that hopelessness, we're in that, I just want to lay on the couch and, overeat or emotionally eat and binge watch movies. And we find ourselves looping between these two things, so that it's not necessarily that we're always in depression or that we're always in anxiety. The longer that we are holding on to this, the more that our body just gets into this loop. Eventually, it starts to run on such low depletion state that it spends more and more time in the low energy state because it simply doesn't have the energy to generate a good stress response anymore.
Hey, taking a quick break to let you know I've got a new book coming out called Tiny Shifts. It's about how small, intentional shifts in your emotional health can transform your stress, relationships, and even your longevity. When you join the early access list, you're going to get a free sneak peek of the Tiny Shifts mini guide and weekly insights into the top tools and trends in emotional health. Just head to drelishagoldstein.com/tiny-shifts-early. If you can't remember that, the link is also in the show notes below. Now let's get back to the episode.
So I want everyone to hear that. I want to do that for everyone who's listening. Your body has a line, is what you're saying, and it's not a failure that you're crossing the line. It's just your biology. You mentioned a couple examples on how somebody knows that it's crossed the line into trauma physiology. Can you say those again? You were giving an example of like wanting to watch, or whatever. But like, how does someone know they crossed the line into trauma physiology?
I feel that this is so important for people to know that I have people fill out a nervous system journal for 3 days before they come in and meet with one of my health coaches. And the nervous system journal is, here are your 3 states of your nervous system. And every hour for 3 days, except while you're sleeping, I want you to stay asleep, you're going to put a mark on the chart for which state you are in. We only have 3 states. So learn how to recognize which state you're in, and then you can map it out, and everything will become so clear. So how do people recognize which state am I in? Well, there is the ventral vagal. We also call this parasympathetic rest and digest. That is a state, Elisha, that I'm going to joke that hardly ever is someone in, especially in our society today. So you don't even need to worry about that. But no, this is the state where you actually feel calm.
You can learn to get there more often.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of hope. Starting out, you probably don't know what this feels like, but this is the goal. The goal is to learn how to get here, how to shift your own state. And that's exactly where I say people need to start. They don't need to start with processing stories. They need to start with learning how to shift their state to this calm, alive state. But it's where we are feeling safe enough, secure enough for me to be open, just like here with you right now. If I perceived you as someone dangerous, like I'd have my guard up and be like, what is he trying to get out of me? But I'm not. I'm here because I feel safe enough with you, which means I can open myself up to you and share with you. So that's what it feels like to be in this state of the parasympathetic. And the stress state is always a very high energy state. So I think of it as a firefighter who is rushing towards a fire to put it out. That is the epitome of a stress response, a firefighter who is actively taking action to overcome a danger. The trauma state is going to be that same firefighter if he is not successful and he stands there helpless, powerless, watching the house finish burning down and collapse in front of him. And even as I say that, right, like I feel my energy drop. I feel that deep discouragement, the inevitable shame, even though it wasn't his fault. He still is going to have those thoughts of, I should have done more. I could have done more. It's, it's on me that the house, went down. And so that would be one of the best ways for a person to recognize that they're in that state is their energy level. It's actually how I started mapping out my energy or my nervous system states when I didn't know anything about anything related to the nervous system. And I noticed that I had such different energy states. And sometimes they fluctuated over the course of the same day, right? Like in the morning, I'd feel optimistic. And by 1 p.m., I was depressed. And all I wanted to do was just to lay there and to, numb and make the world go away, turn on my music really loud and blare it in my ears so that I didn't have to think about all the problems going on in my life and that my health had fallen apart and that I was afraid about the future. So that's why I interchanged the word trauma with overwhelm. And really then help people use that distinction for, are we talking about stress, which is high energy anxiety? Or are we talking about overwhelm, which is low energy?
Let me ask you then, because I've come to the conclusion a little while ago that I feel like we are in a, there's a story that I'm sure you've heard by this guy, David Foster Wallace, who he gave a speech at Kenyon College. It was he was someone who was brought to kind of give a speech at the graduation. And he gave this talk about these fish swimming in water. And there's these two fish swimming in water and they're just kind of making their way along. And like one older fish comes by them. And as he's like crossing them, he says, "Hey guys, how's the water?" And they kind of go along and they look at him. They look at each other afterward. And they're like, "What the hell is water?" And I feel like we're swimming in a kind of a constant low-grade pervasive sense of overwhelm. And many people feel like they're just surviving. They're doing everything they can in life, but they're just surviving. This is different than what you described a moment ago, which was this idea of like, by 1 p.m., I'm out. I just want to like pull the covers over my head and do that. But there's this other area that is like what a lot of people are experiencing that feels like overwhelm right now. It's not trauma, but it's like ongoing. And maybe that's closer to like this chronic stress. Maybe that's kind of maybe that's a little bit more what it is.
This is what I would call the chronic functional freeze. It is the trauma response.
Interesting.
It is trauma response because it has the patterns of a trauma response. So patterns of a trauma response come from the 3 survival strategies that our body uses to survive feeling trapped, powerless, and alone. Those are your criteria for trauma. And the 3 survival strategies are to 1, dissociate, 2, stop moving, immobilize, and 3, conserve energy.
Right.
So those three strategies now become chronic when we don't complete that trauma response, and it becomes just this background sense of our life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why what I recognized in myself, and I agree, recognize in most everyone walking around these days, is that we have this underlying overwhelm or the chronic freeze, but we're trying to override it with stimulation.
Yes. Right.
And this stimulation comes from stress. So we can create stress because adrenaline is going to give us some energy, help us get out of that low grade blah, overwhelm sense that we have. This is where we can also see people creating some drama in their life. Why? Because drama will help create that adrenaline and will actually help them function. And that's why we call it the functional freeze, is because even though you've got this freeze or trauma response in the background, you are still functioning. I mean, I got 2 master's degrees and I'm a double board certified physician with a chronic functional freeze because I had learned how to function and push through so well that I was able to get all that done before I had my complete burnout and health crash. So yes, I see that as a feature of recognizing how many people have stored trauma and what they do to try to function and adapt to life living with that.
What I'm hearing from you, though, is it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to live in that chronic freeze. I like the idea. I'd love to. I don't know if we want to do this or not, but I like the idea unpacking the idea, the for lack of better words, the idea that we can create drama in our lives because that creates adrenaline and that gives us energy in some way. Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. As long as we talk about the drama that you've created in your life and not the drama that I've created in my life. No, I'll tell you what I used to do is that I used to sleep in until the very last minute so that then I had to rush to wherever I had to go. And I never connected the dots that I'm doing that because I wake up not wanting to actually get up. I wake up in overwhelm. And so from the moment when I wake up, if I can stress myself out, I don't have time to feel that I actually feel overwhelmed and that I don't like my life right now.
Mm-hmm. It gives you the energy to be the functional freeze, gives you the energy for it.
Exactly. And so again, even that, as simple as I set my alarm so that from the minute I wake up, I have to rush to wherever I'm going, allowed me to avoid, numb, and distract myself from this uncomfortable reality that I'm overwhelmed by the problems in my life right now. And I don't like to feel overwhelmed. Our brain does not want us to sit in that overwhelm. So it will do and find things to do to not feel that. I was shocked when I saw how deep my emotional eating patterns were. Sort of like asking the fish, how's the water? Asking me like, how's the emotional eating? I didn't even know that I was emotionally eating. I was so good at telling myself that, no, I'm actually really hungry. I really am hungry right now. And this is how good our body is at protecting us from our own stored trauma. It will create physical pains of hunger so that you will overeat and use that as a way to just keep that other stuff down and not have it surface. And then we can talk about, well, what did you eat, Aimie? I was eating all the things that were triggering a histamine response. Histamine response is going to trigger adrenaline. Once I learned that, I was like, oh my goodness, of course it makes sense that I'm craving those food that I have a sensitivity to. And at the time, I'm like, fuck this. I don't care. I just need this food, right?
Yeah,
and I'm
it's the
eating
classic
this.
buckets. Yeah.
And once I came to understand the science, I no longer needed to shame myself for the cravings that I was having. And instead, I'm able to see, Aimie, you're craving this right now because you have just had a trigger and you have completely lost your sense of safety. let's go refine your sense of safety.
That's
And
what you
then-
really need. Yeah.
That's what I really was looking for. So let's go create that first, and then we can decide if we really want to eat that pan of brownies or whatever it was. But there's another thing around food where the proteins that are in gluten and milk are opiate binders. So opiates are painkillers. We have natural opiates. They're called endorphins inside of our body. But any pain pill that you are prescribed is also an opiate, and it numbs pain, not just physical pain, emotional pain. And so it was no coincidence that the foods that I was then starting to crave were these dairy-based and bread-based food that were also acting to emotionally numb just by the proteins that were in them.
So milk and
Yes.
bread,
Yes.
any gluten-related thing are
Bind opiate receptors.
so is there some kind of cause and effect of those two like numbing our pain in some way?
Yeah,
Is that
exactly. And that's why when, like you've probably never ever experienced this, Elisha. But when I was experiencing what I would consider, like overwhelm or near overwhelm, not just a little stress, but like near overwhelm.
What is this? What is this, Elisha? You've never experienced this. I'll go into my story afterwards. Yeah.
I found myself craving those kinds of foods. It was never celery, carrots, a good sweet potato that I was craving. Right?
Yeah.
It's the brownies. It's the tub of ice cream. It's these things that unknowingly, even as a physician, I did not know this. Unknowingly, my body is saying that's what I want because I know it will help me numb my pain. It's not just the food, though it is the food because of the stretching of the stomach. The vagus nerve comes right on top of that stomach. And so when we have stretching of the stomach, it does help soothe us by its effect on the vagus nerve, which is why even just drinking a sip of water will help a person calm themselves down, which is why when you see people being interviewed and they're asked a really difficult question, they'll often take a sip of water first. They're doing a vagus nerve trick. That's all it is. They're just soothing themselves with putting food or water down their esophagus, and our vagus nerve runs right behind and in front of our esophagus and then spreads out over our stomach. And so anytime that we have stretching of our stomach, we are also soothing ourselves by that stretching of the stomach. So any food will do. But again, our brain, in its infinite wisdom of all the things that it has experienced in our lifetime, knows that if you really want to numb your feelings, you're going to go for the simple carbs that have dairy-based and gluten.
Interesting. What about sugars? What about that?
Absolutely. I mean, sugars increase your dopamine. They also will cause the adrenaline release. And so the sugar is also a big part of the craving that will help a person numb and shift their state. I went into addictions, right? To study trauma in the body. This is the same thing that a person who uses substances is doing. They're just trying to shift their inner state. I'm feeling overwhelmed and I want to feel relaxed. This substance will help me do that. Same thing with emotional eating. I feel stressed. I feel overwhelmed. I need to shift out of that. I need some relief. And so I'm going to use this to shift my state and find relief. Now, it's not a healthy regulation. It's a false regulation, right? And even with substances and food, it's really putting us into a freeze response where we're numb, we're disconnecting, we're dissociating by using these foods or substances.
So you also talk about how you can make kind of deposits in your capacity account. This idea of like kind of shifting gears here to talking about our capacity.
Yeah.
Say a little bit about that. So if I'm someone listening right now and I'm realizing that, okay, I'm listening to Aimie and I'm over the line for sure. What do I do in the first day to make it kind of simple for me? Because when we're in that state of overwhelm, we can't handle big things anyway. And so what do we start doing to kind of make these deposits in our capacity account?
Yeah. So there's so much solution once we know the science. Because now that we've got it laid out, we can see where are my leverage points for not going into overwhelm. Because once we go into overwhelm, the body needs 3 things to come out, and it's going to happen every single time. It needs safety, it needs energy, but it needs time. We can't pull ourselves out of a freeze response immediately. Once we've actually crossed that line, it needs time. Now, this is the last thing that any of us want to give it. We don't like the freeze response. It feels uncomfortable, so we don't want to give it any time. But that's why the healing journey is about learning how to not go into overwhelm, but work with your nervous system to shift your line of overwhelm or your sense of capacity. So in chapter 11, I talk about how attachment in our early life forms this foundation of our capacity and really our sense of capacity. And I have worked with a lot of children and adults who were born premature, or they had some type of complication with their birth, that they didn't get that ideal birth process that you would want as coming into the world, where the ideal is a vaginal birth, then you immediately get skin-to-skin time with mom. That's the ideal. For these people, they had to immediately go to the neonatal ICU for life-saving measures, where they're put under all these bright lights. They're cold because they just came out of inside of a body that they've been living in. And so they've never been exposed to room temperature and air. And then all these people grab their legs or their arms and poke them and cause pain. Now, as a baby, you don't know that that's because they need your blood and they need to do this to save your life. You just know that, again, you are trapped. You cannot get away. You're powerless. They can overpower you. And you're all alone. That changes their nervous system, and their tendency is to forever have this programming then that their nervous system believes everything hard is just overwhelming for me. And it's to the point where there was a psychologist in the 1960s, Seligman, and he did studies around learned helplessness. Amazing studies. And this is exactly what he saw in these dogs that he was studying, that something could happen that he would cause them to be trapped, powerless, and alone. And this somehow changed their perception of their capacity. And they wouldn't try to escape future danger because they simply believed that they weren't capable. And this is what happens in us humans as well. So even when we are talking about capacity, we still want to talk about our mind level and the beliefs that we hold about ourselves. But there's also then our body level. Now, in my book, I'm open about some experiences that I've had just to demonstrate some examples. And when I'm talking about body level, I am talking about the somatic level. And this is where if we had a car accident and we're driving down the same stretch of road, different day, we know that logically, but somehow our body still our hands start to sweat, our heart starts to race, and we're having a body reaction, even though, Elijah, our mind is like, this is the stupidest thing. Why am I doing this? Because this is clearly a different day. I'm not in any danger, but you can't stop the body from having its reaction to its perception of danger through associations and things that it has coupled with danger. So this would be another area in which our capacity, the perception of our capacity, needs to be addressed. Now, let's talk about biology.
Okay, so you just addressed, I'm just going to summing it up here. You just addressed why we need this, why we require this capacity first. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. This capacity is determining whether we will go into overwhelm or whether we will be able to have a stress response and complete a stress response. And so much of this comes down to our biology. And many people who are in trauma therapy are not thinking about their mitochondria. They're not thinking about the immune cells in their brain And this is what I've come to realize. Actually, my response to overwhelm is very much dependent on these aspects of my biology. So if I have a nutrient deficiency, if I'm low in magnesium, for example, my body has to have magnesium to be able to run away from a lion. Well, if I'm deficient in magnesium, it's going to say, sorry, I can't run away from this lion. And so we should just give in and give up right now.
Ah, interesting.
You extrapolate that to any other scenario in life. And for us, it's opening an email. For us, it's getting a text message. It's whatever everyday problem we have. But if we are deficient in a essential nutrient that our body needs to make energy, it says, sorry, I don't have the energy to confront this problem. And we go into overwhelm. And so that is why I say that the trauma response or overwhelm is an energy problem. Because if we had the ability to make more energy and to use up that energy effectively, we wouldn't go into overwhelm. We wouldn't go into the trauma response. We would be able to complete a stress response and not have all this accumulated trauma.
So is one of the things that you're saying in there about moving the line or increasing our capacity? Because one of the things I was hearing you say when you were talking about the magnesium or being magnesium deficient and needing magnesium is people should get a workup around their body and their blood levels and different things that are happening. Because when it comes to trauma, even if it was something that happened a long time ago, your physiology or biology has changed. And one of the interventions to working with trauma is actually becoming really kind of shoring up some of those biological deficiencies and in addition to the psychological stuff.
Exactly. And the biological deficiencies are going to determine your line of overwhelm on an emotional level, because our body perceives certain emotions as dangerous. And so when we are presented with that danger, our body is going to be looking at, well, how much energy do I have? Do I have energy for this new danger that just showed up? Like, for example, grief, right? Like grief is a very hard emotion or feeling. And so our body is like, oh, this is dangerous to let this grief surface. And it's going to check. We have this dashboard where it checks everything. And it's going to check, how much energy do I have? It's also going to be checking, how many toxins do I have in my body? It's going to be checking the nutrient levels. It's going to be checking all of these aspects that go into, if I needed to run from a lion, would I be able to? Because if not, I should just give in right now. And it's doing that with feelings, because it perceives uncomfortable feelings as a danger.
Okay. And partly could the simplicity of that be because it's going to take too much energy to deal with these feelings? And I'm at a scale of on a scale of 100, my energy level's at a 20, and this grief's going to take 40, and so I can't. I'm out.
Exactly. And then you find yourself brain fog, disconnecting, saying like, I can't do this, right? Like that's exactly the equation and the decision that happens at a subconscious level in your nervous system.
Yeah. So then what are the lines of, so I've crossed the line. I need to increase my capacity. How do you approach somebody like that? What are you saying that they, like, practically in their day in real time need to start considering?
Yes. Now, I'd like to insert that before I teach that people should build their capacity, I teach that they should find their current capacity.
Yes. Right.
You teach this all the time. So
recognize what's there. Let's get a map first of what we're dealing with.
A map.
Yeah.
Let's be able to meet our body where it's at. Not say, my expectation is that you're up here. It's being able to say, this is where I recognize your current capacity is at. Where I'd like to get us is up here. But to do that, we got to start where we're at. And so we find our inner safety as the way to find that current capacity. What is my current window of tolerance? How much grief can I feel and it not overwhelm me? How much can I exercise and it not overwhelm me? There are many people who can use their what's fancy word in medicine called post-exertional malaise. It's this idea that you work out and you are exhausted, not just sore, you're exhausted. And that's because you did too much, but you didn't know that you were doing too much at the time. I used to do this all the time.
Sounds like my last workout.
Then let's talk.
Okay.
I'm blowing past my line, my critical line of overwhelm, blowing past it because my mind was like, we should be doing a 6-mile run today. And my body is like, I only have the capacity for 3 miles today. I don't care. You're doing what I tell you to do, right? And that's how most people live. Most people live making decisions in their head rather than listening to their body. And that's why they're going into overwhelm. So first, before we build our capacity, I need people to find their current capacity, because the more times that they go into overwhelm, the more damage they're doing to their biology. And it's just going to make it harder for us to get work done. There is no growth in overwhelm.
What are we talking about here? We're talking about inflammation. We're talking about...
All of that. Yeah, we're talking about inflammation. We're talking about disruption of our detoxification system, disruption of our digestive system. So literally the lining starts becoming leaky, and substances that should never enter into our system are now filtering through the wall, coming into our system. That's creating more gut inflammation. That will then go to our brain because of the vagus nerve and cause more brain inflammation. So we're talking about disturbances in our hormone, in our gut, in our sugar levels and insulin levels, in our heart rate variability. It's everything, Elisha. And that's what I wanted to show people in this book, is that it's not just isolated to this. It's your whole entire body, from system down to cellular level. Did you know that when we go into overwhelm or this trauma response, it actually is changing your DNA?
I thought maybe it could, well, actually maybe, because it's going to change it impacts your kids. You get that transgenerational trauma that gets passed on. Yeah.
This is how it happens. Like, it's not woo-woo anymore. We know the mechanism by which these trauma responses actually change our DNA, causing our own diseases like cancer. So it's going to bring on epigenetic conditions. PTSD has now been found to be an epigenetic condition. It's triggered by going into these trauma responses. So it's going to negatively affect our life. And that is why there's no pride in being like, I worked so hard, I went into overwhelm. No, like our initial goal, this first phase of the healing journey, is just to be able to, yes, make our life smaller in order to find and stay within our window of capacity. Then we can build that window. But first, you got to find it and get in it, because now we can build our capacity with a foundation of safety, with a foundation of, I'm here to support my body, not do what I've always done, which is push my body, override my body, and put my body into overwhelm. That is not going to work anymore. So this is a completely different way of befriending our body, which is a necessity for the healing journey. We have to first find the current capacity of our body, get in that window of capacity, even though temporarily that will mean making our life smaller, but then that will allow us to create that strong foundation that we can then use to grow and grow on a foundation of safety and support, so we're not going into overwhelm.
When you say make our life smaller, there's a too muchness kind of happening, which I think a lot of people feel anyway. But in this case, making our life smaller means specifically
everything that triggers your body into overwhelm. People, places.
So less people maybe, or noticing which people trigger the overwhelm.
I would want a person to just take inventory of what are all the things, what are all the situations, what are all the moments in which I find myself going into overwhelm. And then when you experience that, what was it about this situation? How can I avoid this in the future? Not to say that I want people to forever avoid their triggers, because triggers are not bad. Triggers are just information. But if it's going to trigger you into overwhelm, you can't work with your system when it's in overwhelm. We've got to get you out of overwhelm into your window of capacity where we can work with it from a place of curiosity, from a place of stress. This is where stress becomes really good and really helpful, because we're going to need to be able to sit with that stress of like, oh, I feel some grief coming up. But it's manageable. I'm not allowing myself to go into overwhelm in these first initial phases.
What do you want the exhausted, high functioning person to stop blaming themselves for?
Me and you.
Yeah.
What would I want us to stop blaming ourselves for? It's a long list. And honestly, Elisha, at this point of my healing journey, there's no room for blame at any point, at any time, because that just causes shame. And again, I can't work with my nervous system if it's in shame. I can only work with my nervous system when I'm curious. And so if I see myself having a reaction or doing something that I'm like, Aimie, this is interesting. This is not usually the kind of person you like to be. What's really going on? That's a very different question. In my mind, it's been about asking myself better questions.
Yeah, that's key.
Than blame and blaming myself.
So I call that accessing our natural intelligence.
Yes.
To use the artificial intelligence term, our natural intelligence. Yeah.
Exactly. So that would be my encouragement for people is ask better questions. Always ask from a place of curiosity as much as possible. I know that that's hard. It took me a very long time to be able to come from a place of curiosity rather than criticism, because my default growing up was perfectionism, very harsh self-judgment, self-criticism. I used to say that don't mind beating me up because I've already beat myself up more than you ever could. And so coming from that perspective, for me to now be able to approach myself with a sense of curiosity, even when I'm doing something that I'm not proud of, that's a huge change for me. And I would want that for everyone because of just how much it opens up for us to actually understand ourselves and work with, again, I'll use a parts language, that part of us that's coming up at that moment that it's wanting to do that in order to find some sense of safety, control, relief, whatever it is. It always comes down really to loss of a true sense of safety inside.
Yeah, right. So what can that's a good question to access the natural intelligence to say what's something that will support me feeling safe right now.
Yeah, right now.
Kind of get that. But even with that, I'd say the important thing about your work and your book is sometimes we need scaffolding to even unpack those questions because we might not have the answers until we see other people teaching us them.
Exactly. Yeah. This is where your work is so important, right? Like, I feel like this is what you do. You help people have that scaffolding to really help them feel safe to ask some of these questions. Right?
Yeah.
This is one of the big misconceptions that I was taught, and I feel like many people are still taught, where it's just like, okay, we know that we need to feel our feelings in order to heal them. So let me go start feeling my feelings. Or, whatever it is, like the first step is this. And actually the first step, as you say, is let's create the safety to feel. Mm-hmm. And then the feelings will surface when they're ready and at the amount that feels safe for our body. But no, our job isn't to, okay, I'm going to go feel my feelings. That's a terrifying first step if you've been like me who've never felt your feelings. Mm-hmm. But instead, if I focus on right here, right now, present moment, what does my body need? What can I do for myself and my body right now to just feel a little bit safer?
Those are great questions to land on. First of all, thank you so much for gifting us your time and all of this. And I hope for everyone who's listening, just like pause, you can rewind, you can watch this again, just take in all the nuggets from this, from Aimie, and Let's kind of give everyone a sense of where they can find you, the biology of trauma, where all things are sold, of course. But tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, they can find me on biologyoftrauma.com. And when they purchase my book, they can get it anywhere that books are sold. Amazon is currently having a sale, so they frequently do. And when they get my book, I've got some free resources in there. I mentioned the Nervous System Journal. I've got the Nervous System Journal that I use on my website. So that's biologyoftrauma.com/book. And they can then go and get all the resources related to my book.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you again. I look forward to doing this again sometime.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Emotional Longevity Podcast. I hope you found it as inspiring and thought-provoking as I did. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit like down below, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you know who could benefit from these insights. Your support helps us grow this incredible community and reach more people who need it. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to truly integrate these ideas into your life, I'd love to invite you to join me in a beautiful, supportive community that's doing this transformative work together. It's a space where you'll find guidance, connection, and the tools you need to create lasting emotional health and resilience. Check out the links in the description below to learn more. And before you go, make sure to tune into our next episode. It's one that you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, emotional health isn't about just feeling good. It's about building the foundation for a longer, healthier, and more joyful life. I'll see you soon.